Equilibrium of Power is a legendary cruiser commander's skill, and it was buffed in the July 2026 update. I want to talk about that buff today and show it to you in action. We're going to be playing the Tier 7 Tech Tree US Cruiser Cleveland, which is a ship I haven't played regularly in a long time. It's an old ship now in 2026, but I think it's still a very solid light cruiser. Although I feel like for the past couple of years, every time I've played a Tier 7 battle, there has been a distinct lack of Clevelands. Maybe that'll change with the July 2026 update and the buff to EOP. I suppose I should show you my commander build. We're running Norm Scott with basically a fire focus build. The two inspirations are Mikawa and Azurlane Harbin. Azurlane Harbin's base trait increases the fire chance by 1.6%, along with torpedo flooding chance by 23%. That latter part is of course useless to Cleveland since it has no torpedoes, but the 1.6% fire chance buff, coupled with Norm Scott's Burn It Down XXL skill in the first row, which gives a 2% fire chance buff, and Igniter in the second row, which gives a 3% fire chance buff. Well, all of this combined together with the new Equilibrium of Powers skill, that means Cleveland is going to be lighting a lot of fires this match, and you'll see that as it happens. Now, of course, we spawn on the alpha flank, which is maybe not the best part of this map for a light cruiser such as Cleveland. This kind of thing wants to tuck itself behind an island and lob shells over said island with its very floaty shell trajectory. But wait, we can't do that if we're going to be perma-spotted by Aleutian. Here he comes, inside of the cap, smoking up inexplicably in front of us, already having used all of his torpedoes. I don't know what he expected would happen here, but one thing I could say about the Aleutian is it's an extremely potent ship, potentially even overpowered. You probably shouldn't be able to have a smoke screen with a super heal and a 5 km ship detecting sonar like the Lucian does. Although, by the actions of this particular Lucian, you would never think that that ship could be overpowered in any way. He ends up going down as the first kill of the game, not to us, we only get a fist, and that is going to be sort of a theme on this flank as we continue our work here now against two defenseless battleships, which no longer have any spotting and which won't be able to see us over this rock. Thanks to the Cleveland's rather low profile, we can now comfortably do the work of a light cruiser and support our team with our DPM output against this Amagi and this other battleship here. And this Amagi, for his part, well, now that his Lucian is gone, he seems to have realized he's maybe pushed in a little bit too far, and he's not going to continue forward, which of course makes him an easy target for our HE spam. And with that fire, and that one, we now have 9 fires lit in less than the first 5 minutes of this battle. That is going to be due in large part to the Equilibrium of Power buff, which we should talk about, I suppose, as we switch to AP to start farming this Amagi's broadside. Even with this newly buffed EOP and this excellent fire chance on Cleveland, you do still want to switch to the AP when the situation calls for it, because it can shred a lot of hit points, even on broadside battleships at relatively long ranges. Anyway, as we open up against the Izumo, let's talk about the EOP buff. I'll read to you directly from the Ministry of Balance article. The skill is available for the following commanders: Thomas Kincaid, Norman Scott, Azurlane Baltimore, Azurlane Montpelier, Azurlane Chapayev, Azurlane Aurora, Stepan Makarov, Nikolai Kuznetsov, and Ivan B. Delightful. Despite its strong positive effect, this skill's drawbacks often outweighed its benefits. That's why we decided to remove one of its negative effects and add another positive one instead. Note that the logic behind the new modifier matches skills like Igniter and Burn It Down XXL. It adds to the fire chance setting instead of it being multiplied. So what they did was removed the effect that HE shell fire chance is reduced by 25% with EOP, and instead, cruiser HE, shell, and bomb fire setting chance is now increased by a maximum of 3% while using EOP. That was the change to it. The logic behind this skill, and I suppose we should back up to explain what it does for those of you who may not know. The main reason you would use Equilibrium of Power is for a light cruiser, exactly like Cleveland. You want to use it because it increases the armor penetration of your HE shells by 30%. Now, Cleveland, of course, has 12 152mm guns, and at base, the high explosive on its main battery only pens 25mm of armor, which is not a tremendous amount at higher tiers like Tier 7. Most of the lowest armor values on battleships, for example, and perhaps on other heavier cruisers, is either going to be 32mm in the case of battleships, or like the Baltimore, for example, 27. The Baltimore has 27mm all along its hull, and without Equilibrium of Power, Cleveland would not be able to pen the Baltimore's hull or the hull of most battleships. Instead, it would have to focus on the superstructures of battleships and shooting at light cruisers like D7P here with the HE. Anything 25mm or less, the HE is going to pen it base, but there's just not an awful lot of that. And then the Cleveland's fire chance is 12% base. It's got a 7-second reload, on these guns. We have it at 5.8 seconds with the reload mod, which is pretty good. Now, if you could only pen 25mm of armor, you're not going to be getting a tremendous amount of damage from HE penetrations themselves. Instead, you're going to have to rely on the base 12% fire chance, which of course you can buff in a couple of ways, and then get most of your damage through dots, damage over time, fire damage, which is more subject to the whims and wishes of RNG than HE shell penetrations. So the idea always was, if you wanted more penetration power for your high explosive to get more consistent damage by simply landing HE shells, you would take EOP, and in return, your fire chance would be nerfed by 25%. It was, I think, in theory and in principle, a logical trade-off. Do you want to rely on RNG dots to deal most of your damage in a light cruiser, or do you want to rely less on that and instead rely more on shell penetration? Well, now you don't really have to make that choice. There's only two downsides to taking EOP on a light cruiser like Cleveland. Number one, it does cut down the HE shell damage, but it's not all that catastrophic. The Cleveland has a maximum HE shell damage of 2200 base, which is massive. If you shoot at a DD with it, that thing is going to evaporate after a few salvos. But with EOP, that 2200 maximum damage becomes 1840. Still, pretty good damage for HE shells, even against destroyers. In return, your penetration goes from 25mm to 32, so suddenly you can pen many more parts of every other battleship hull that you're going to face. Jean Bart there would be a good candidate. He's coated in 32mm of armor literally everywhere. Unfortunately, we're not going to get a chance to actually shoot at him, but if we did, we would pen him everywhere except his belt armor, his turrets, etc. Massachusetts, another ship that's covered in 32mm of armor practically everywhere, except for the deck, which is 38. Can't pen that, but can pen the rest of his ship, and as you can see, there's going to be a distinct lack of shatters whenever we land shells. Plus, we're lighting fires all the time. So we get that extra penetration, and then with this build, again, using the fully maxed EOP 3% fire bonus, the Azurlane Harbin Inspiration, Burn It Down XXL, and Igniter, the base 12% fire chance on Cleveland is increased to a whopping 22.6%. That's a 22.6% fire chance on each one of these 12 shells that is firing every 5.8 seconds, or potentially even better if you wanted to use the Epic Reload mod on Cleveland instead and cut down the reload by every 30,000 damage you do. We'd have it procced a few times if we had that mod in place, and our reload would be even lower. But in the course of this battle, which has been just over 10 minutes so far, we've just lit our 17th fire. 18th, 19th, 2 fires in one salvo there. The fire chance with EOP and this build on Cleveland in particular is astronomical now. It's just going to light a fire practically every other salvo you shoot, sometimes 2 at a time, and on top of that, you're penning 32 millimeters of armor. This buff might have been a little bit too much. It's almost like there's no downside at all, aside from the relatively minor slap on the wrist that your HE shell damage gets. And then, because the EOP skill is in the legendary row, you would have to forego the fully packed skill in order to take it. And normally I would run the fully packed skill on the Cleveland to get an extra charge of each one of the consumables. After all, we've got sonar, radar, and a repair party. I think fully packed is really good so that you can have an extra repair party on a squishy ship like a cruiser that really can benefit from being able to restore a little bit of HP when you make mistakes. And we did need to use that heal in this battle after that really big hit we took early on. But the battle is wrapping to a close here. Jean Bart goes down, and then the enemy destroyer is never going to end up showing himself for some reason. So we end up taking that Bravo cap, and we end this battle with 163,000 damage done, 20 fires, 3,600 base XP, and the high caliber medal. If you haven't played Cleveland or a lot of the light cruisers on the American or Soviet lines in a while, you should probably put EOP on there and try them out. The Cleveland has an insane fire chance, and I want to test the Worcester next because it already has 30 millimeters of pen. It would be able to pen 39 with this. That's going to be spicy. A lot of cruisers are going to be spicy now in July of 2026. I don't know how good this is for the overall balance of the game, though. Let me know what you think in the comments. Give the video a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye.